Hi, everyone. Welcome to Freebird Spirit YouTube channel. Thanks for coming out and hanging out with us for this discussion and awakening stories, hopefully creating some expansion and awareness. You know, I woke up this morning, Chrys, but I pretty much do this every morning unless I'm just way too tired and too grumpy. But I wake up in the morning and I'm excited about the day because we have opportunities to learn something new and grow and understand something we might not have fully understood. The remarkable thing about that is we totally feel like we know. We're in the know. You know what I mean? We don't know that we don't know something, right? But be aware that you don't know something. And be willing to be open to learn something, right? And so I'm always excited about learning, and know that learning doesn't always have to hurt. Like everybody's like, oh, don't put that on my playlist. I don't want to learn. But I'm not talking about that kind of learning. I'm talking about, just being open and learning something about the human next to you or down the street from you. Because we don't know, right? We just don't know. And if you're open and always willing to learn, then it makes the world a better place, I think. So let's all wake up ready to learn, willing to learn, right? So
not me.
Chrys already knows it all, you guys. She already sits in the know.
Wish. That's funny.
She sits in the know.
I can hear my colleagues now. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, what?
What the heck is that?
Or so just
like,
know, what the fuck are you talking about? So just know that we don't know. And as long as you know that you don't know, things will go well. And guess who sent me? Ruth sent me.
Ruth sent me.
So today we are talking about Chrys's book, White Weddings. What spurred you to want to tackle this?
You have to come out from behind that book.
What spurred you to tackle this conversation in a book form?
That's a very long story. That's a very
stories
long
is how we learn, right?
That's called a lifelong story.
Oh,
yeah. I was going to respond to what you said when you opened things up, which was that every day we learn something. When I was in graduate school and being my shy self, I'm standing in this event and, we were having coffee and cookies or something. I don't even remember what it was. And off to the side of me was my dissertation advisor and a couple of other faculty. And I heard my advisor say, "She's intellectually curious. Isn't that wonderful?" I'd never heard that phrase before.
Intellectually
that's what I've said to you about you, is that you're intellectually curious. It's fun. It's fun. It's fun. It's fun to sort of say, I want to know more. Oh, who knew that? It's that kind of stuff. But I was so like, I am. Oh, wow, that's cool.
Intellectually curious. Perfect. Let's wake up, you guys. Let's wake up tomorrow intellectually curious.
Yes. Yes, and it doesn't mean you have to read a book, even though it won't hurt you. I had a student last week send me an email and said, "Do I have to buy the book? Couldn't I just read the PowerPoints?"
Right.
Said, no. No, you couldn't. Anyway. Yeah, what started that book? Well, I mean, those are lifelong stories, right? What we come to do. These are culminating moments, right? As opposed to moments. So I sort of have always known I needed to do that work. I just didn't know what form it was going to take.
Mhm.
So when I was in graduate school, I was specializing in gender studies and women's studies. And I had a teacher who had an international reputation in that field. And so she would have us have class at her house, and we go over, we do all this stuff. And at one point she starts talking about gender, and she's talking about people, the world is socially constructed to put men and women in certain spaces and certain roles, and she's going on and on and on. And I did a Debbie.
What?
Excuse me. Why?
Yeah.
Why? This is what used to drive my mother nuts. Why? And she's like, what do you mean? I said, to what end? What do we need those roles for? What are we socializing people to do that for? Why? She didn't answer me. I'm like, okay, something's wrong here. Well, this went on. Now, when you're in graduate school, you're with other students, but you travel like in a pack, and they're all intellectually curious, and we're all working ideas together, right? So, and that in itself for women was liberating. It's like, wow, this is so freaking cool. So, I turned to one of them and said, gender for what? And she's going, I don't know. So fast forward a little bit. So I start teaching, and I'm teaching an evening class, and most of the students are older. And so I had this moment where, I was teaching on gender, and we're looking at gender. I said, okay, so we're going to brainstorm together. I'm going to make a list on the wall, on the board, and I'm going to ask you, what's masculine, what's feminine. I was doing all that stuff, right? It was the 80s. And then somebody made that some people feel permission to make homophobic cracks. And so this guy did. So I looked at him and I said, okay, so what's a homosexual? So then we made a list, right? And it's all the stereotype. And so then I get to work with them on the stereotypes, on, what are the assumptions here, all that. And still, it was like I'd given them permission to crack on these topics. So I finally looked at them and I said, so what's a heterosexual? Well, they got even more uncomfortable.
Wow.
Way more uncomfortable. And I remember standing there saying to myself, oh my God, I found something. So I worked it, right? They were shifting around in their seats. They're like, and then I suddenly realized gender in the interests of heterosexuality. What do you need male, female stuff for, except for structures that are built and depend on those, right? So it was a moment. So again, fast forward again, now I'm doing my dissertation, but my dissertation's on the 19th century reproductive rights and human rights stuff and women's rights. And I get partway through that, and I realized that what I'm doing is laying the foundation for understanding how the women's movement emerged in the 20th century. Because they were doing the work, they were setting the stage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so finally I got into that, and my last chapter of the dissertation, and I don't remember the title of it anymore, but the last chapter was about heterosexuality as a structure of power. And my dissertation advisor, hi Judy, got mad and rejected my last chapter 2 weeks before my defense.
Wow.
So I called home and said, I can't come home. I've got to stay here. I've got to work on this. I was working in Ithaca. She was living in Ithaca. Home was Albany. So I called home and said, I got to stay here. Rosemary said, I'll meet you there. I said, okay. So she came down. I rewrote the entire last chapter that weekend so she wouldn't reject it. Put it in her mailbox, drove back to Albany, changed my clothes, and drove back to Ithaca to teach. And when my defense happened, she was pissed. She was pissed. She was having a hard time, and we had a falling out, and it was a surprise because we got along really well. So later I asked her, months later, I asked her what happened. She said, "You wanted me to change more, and I'd already changed enough." I was like, wow, what did I fall into? So, so this is, if you're really, this is how I feel anyway. If I'm really paying attention, the signs are there. I had to pay attention to that. And so then I realized, oh, I've got something. I don't know what to do with it exactly. So after graduate school, I wrote an article. And I was pissed. I was basically pissed because people were using heterosexuality as sort of a privileged weapon in a way, right? So here I was at college. It was me and this guy who were temporary. We'd been hired for 2 years, and I wanted to stay. And so we were competing for the same job opening. He and his partner, a woman, have their wedding, and they invite the whole department. I can't have a wedding. I can't invite the whole department. So I felt like, oh my God, look at how heterosexual privilege works. They're going to go to this, and they're going to have a blast, and they're going to say, we want him around. And so that became one of the signifiers. And so when I wrote this article in 1994, it was called something like the Heterosexual Imaginary, Feminist Sociology and Theories of Gender. And I took it to a conference, and people at the conference were listening to me present it, and they got all excited. And this one woman says, "All right, that's good, but how do I use it?" And then I was like, I don't know. How do you use it? So then I was asked to mount a seminar at school, and so we could do whatever we wanted. So I did a seminar. It was supposed to be for 20 people, called Critical Family Studies. And 67 students signed up. And I thought, oh my God, I've tripped onto something here. So I would go to class, and I said, okay, let's start with this. Everybody's going to read brides magazines. I'd never read them. So I made them buy brides magazines. And then we started doing a study. We're reading these, and I'm stunned. Here it is. What was that? 1991 or something like that. And it was so retro. It was so old fashioned and so traditional gender. I was stunned. Okay. And I'm on my way back to Albany after teaching, and I have the radio on, and on NPR, it says, this year's sitcom season is ending with 13 weddings. And now I'm like, wait a minute, something's happening here. But here's the thing. One of the things you learn in sociology is about the taken for granted. It's about the social construction of reality. And the great taken for granted is weddings. Nobody pays attention to them. It's like what Jessica Mitford did years ago with funerals. Nobody writes about them. Nobody pays attention. Nobody does the same thing with weddings. And I started noticing in grocery store lines that there's tons of wedding magazines. I'm like, who knew that? I never even noticed that before. So needless to say, the class we had a blast. We were going after it big time. And that's when I realized that to make it possible for that theory to actually be realized, it needed a topic. So that's gave birth to the weddings book. And Routledge ate it up. They contacted me. You got a book to go with this? And I said I could. And it's like, okay, we want you to write. Yeah, okay, great. And then this very strange thing happened in what was it, 1999, I think it was. Yeah. I went down to New York, and I went to Routledge, and I was meeting with the editor, and she said, stay right there. And I said, okay. And she left the room. She came back in with the publisher, and they rolled out the red carpet, and they said, we're sending you on a national book tour. I was like, what? And they did. I went on a national book tour. it was amazing. It was an amazing experience, but you know me, I was like, I don't want to go to the book. I don't want to go to the bookstore. Leave me alone. So anyway, it was amazing, but that work took off. And the core of that work is really, so how do I say this without it? The core of that work is really to illustrate how homophobia, sexism, racism, classism are embedded in our taken for granted world. And that what we've done with heterosexuality is not natural or normal. What we've done with it is convince us that it is those things when it's been organized, right? So you go to a party and they see you male, female, female, female. It's not natural. That's somebody's idea of what you should be doing, right? And so all of our social world is organized like that. And when you stop and say, wait a minute, I don't want to do it like that. And of course, what's happened is younger generations have figured that out. I think I told you that once I came home from work and my youngest heart daughter was in the living room, and she and boys and girls, and they're all laying on top of each other watching TV. And I was like, wow, look at that. That's so cool. Wasn't sex. It was just there hanging, having a great time. I was like, we didn't do that. This is really nice. So yeah, so some of those generations. But I was thinking about this morning, that this work and the work of others has really given birth to that non-binary movement, right? Because the understanding that heterosexuality is not something naturally occurring, it's organized. It could be natural, doesn't matter. It's still organized. Yeah, so out of that comes a whole lot of stuff that emerged after that.
Now, what I've noticed, what I'm taking away thus far, there's a lot there, but the fact that that the highlighting of heterosexual privilege, I kind of honed in on that, and then I started, when you're talking, I'm thinking of all that you take so much for granted, just like someone being blonde over some, you know what I mean? It comes with different things. Everything is regarded different, and it comes with different levels of privilege, right? But it's an attack. Is what's going on? Is the heterosexual privilege is being attacked? Apparently, is that what's going on here today? In general,
I'm not sure I understand.
So the heterosexual privilege, are they being attacked, and that's why they are trying to hold on to?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, you're really referring to what's going on with these states and the reproductive rights stuff.
Oh, well, overall though, too, and overall, the whole system is being shaken.
Well, and
I
think I said this to you earlier, which was that what we're really watching is the backlash against feminism, and it's the backlash against people claiming their human right to be who they are. And so this book was one of the first to sort of go after that.
Yeah, you're bringing it to light, right? You're bringing it to the surface. But I feel like the system is feeling under attack.
Yeah,
in general. So, when you talk to someone who I just don't want to say, but someone close to me, and they have their sons, and they're worried, and you're talking about what's happening in the globe right now, and then and also any of these systems, and you're trying to bring this to light. And you know, she's worried about, well, my sons don't even, you know, who are they supposed to be now? Because if you're taking this system away, you're taking their that they are a man away. You know what I mean? They're still men.
Yeah,
But if you take
take the rules away,
take the rules away, what happens then?
take the
And
script.
so and so that's that's kind of where I was going with that. But
Yeah, no, you're totally on the mark. You know, the concept that I created in this book that has now been anthologized and all that is the heterosexual imaginary. And you can probably look it up in here because I can't, I wrote it, but I can't quote it. It's a way of thinking. And I think I talked about this last time about ideology and how ideology works, but it's a way of thinking that conceals from view how heterosexuality operates. Now, it's really important to understand that when I'm talking about this stuff, I'm not talking about whether you're attracted to somebody. I could care less. I'm really talking about how we've used it as a power structure.
yes.
Okay. So when we've talked about reproductive rights and we've talked about history from the 19th century, that's heterosexuality. That's the institution and how it was created, how power was distributed in it, who owned what, who, you know, women and children were the property of the husband. You know, some of that's changed, but, you know, come the 20th century, the women's movement, and they took those things by the horns and shook it, you know. And so what we opened up is everything we've come to take for granted today. Even, you know, you and I've talked about it, even in your age group, right? Some of those things have already been taken for granted that weren't there for me.
Right.
I didn't have women's sports. There's a bunch of stuff I didn't have that you did, you know.
Right.
So those, so that was a huge push. And now it's become the taken for granted. You see the things like rape crisis centers and women's studies courses and reading books about women's bodies and all that is taken for granted. But it's only because the work was done.
The work was
Now,
done.
what we're watching, and it's probably reincarnation, but we're watching a whole lot of people try and turn it backwards. Try and turn it back, and you can't turn it back.
Right.
You can't turn it back.
Yep.
One of the other things I want to point out is that the reason it's called white weddings is not because of a white gown.
Oh.
One of the things I did was to go to Condé Nast in New York City to look at how they were making those magazines. And Brides magazine was being made there. So they have an archive. I went through the archive, and no women of color appeared until the Clinton administration. None. And then when they did appear, they were in the back of the magazine. So I interviewed some of the marketers, the advertisers, and they said, oh, well, we do that on purpose. We would lose our customers if we put people of color toward the front. So that was an eye-opener. And then I started to do some historical study about, you know, that during the slavery era, Blacks weren't allowed to marry because marriage was understood as an ownership of property. And they were the property. So they couldn't marry. And so you often read stories. I think when we were talking about this last time about Sojourner Truth, they wouldn't, you know, masters wouldn't allow them to marry who they were in love with. Can't do that. And so as the decades have gone on, you see that there's a different resonance in the Black community over marriage than there is in the white community. And that gets magnified by economic privilege. So the average wedding, right now, actually, the numbers have shifted, but the average wedding right now is $32,000. So when you look at that and you look at people's different levels of income, then you start to see this tiered system play itself out. But over that, then, then you start to look into the products. Okay. So at the time I wrote that book, the second edition, second edition was 2008. Wedding gowns were being made in Guatemala by 15-year-old kids. That's changed. I just read that today because I have a new contract coming. But
New book, guys, new book.
It's just another edition, but they're now 80% are made in China. So the question you have to ask yourself, because you look at that, you look at the diamond industry, which is a very, very hideous history around racism and violence and apartheid and all that. You don't, and I say it repeatedly throughout the book, is this what you wanted for your wedding day? To be participating in a system that abuses children and people of color. And, and so then once you dig deeper into that, you get into, when you go toward the bottom of the economic ladder, you see that marriage is being used as like a weapon. Even I think it was George W. said something, or was it George H.? I can't remember which one of the Bushes said it, that people have to get married in order to stay on welfare. But if you get married and you're on welfare, you don't get as much of a benefit. So it became this huge detriment, really. So it was just the tip of the iceberg. To pick weddings was like not really the goal, but when you start getting there, you start to see how it's symbolic of an entire economic and social system that's keeping a bunch there.
Yeah, and you were quoting some numbers, $42 billion industry or something.
Yeah, it's up to what did they say? I think it was in 2019, the industry was worth 52 billion.
52 billion.
Yes, it's gone down, but they're expecting 22.5 million marriages this year.
Wow. Now, so the narrative is continued to be pushed, different types of narratives are pushed through the media at certain different times. Is that happening now too? Are they with this big push? And then you have the show, the Bachelor show, and all those whatever they are trying to match people up.
Try not to watch.
No, I mean, yeah, but it's a thing. I don't watch either, but I mean, it's a thing, and it's all pushing that narrative that you need to be connected and married and like that. And remember, if you guys remember what she just said about ownership and property, that's the underlying energy of when you get married.
There was an Episcopalian priest, a woman here, one of the first women who was an Episcopalian priest, lived in Syracuse, and some of us went to visit her, and we got into a conversation, and she said, I think it was Betty Bone Sheets, I think that's what it was. She said, I've married a lot of people in my career. She said, I'd have to say 99% have never read the domestic relations laws that govern their marriage. And I didn't know there was such a thing. So I looked at her and said, what's a domestic relation law? Well, listen to this. I actually memorized this. Marriage is a relation between a man and woman and the state. And the state regards with a jealous eye any attempt to interfere in that relationship. Right? And that's why divorce is really about, it's in the legal system. So one of the things I've always loved, the great contradiction, is how conservatives will often say, I don't want the government in my life. I don't want a license for this, or I don't want the government, but they'll get married with a marriage certificate in a heartbeat without asking a question. So I've always found that to be really interesting, that people don't even see that. They don't even get it. It's yeah. The other piece of that story really is what it means to be gay. I've gone to a lot of weddings in my life, and almost without exception, I've always been put at the table with divorced, single, or gay people. Not with the people I knew. It's like, we're going to organize this so that those people who aren't really part of the club are going to go sit over there. And then getting asked on a regular basis, by family mostly, when are you going to get married? Never. And then the laws started to shift. And after this book came out, there was a huge debate, because in Massachusetts, they were passing the gay marriage law. And we talked about that last time, I think. And I didn't want to debate with these people, because I really felt like it's okay. They're doing what they need to do. But to me, it was sort of like celebrating women getting in the military. It's like, okay. I'm not a big fan of war, but yeah. So yeah, this was where was I going to go with that? This was it was just, it came out, I really, the panel I was on that I got caught in, and the person running the panel wanted me to talk, and I really didn't want to argue with the people who had just passed that law. And what I ended up saying was, gay relationships have been around forever. And they've made huge contributions to society. I mean, just think about the arts alone. Just think about Broadway. Think about, music. I mean, and my concern was, what I said to them was, all of a sudden now we can get married. Does that erase everything that came before that?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's, yeah. All right. So I think I answered your question.
You did. And there's so many pieces here that I'm nabbing onto here. The symbolism of the dress, the symbolism of how it's the whole thing is set up, and all those little things come into play here in regards to creating this narrative, going way back, right? So we're talking beginning of time or whatever, the whole marriage thing and owning thing, and there's so many layers to this, you guys, and to the symbolism of the weddings, right, and marriage, that are setting the woman to be property and sold, right, sold and into property as they step into marriage, back in the day, right? And so today, though, when you get married, people will say, well, I'm not going to say that vow. I'm not going to say,
love, honor, and obey.
Love, honor, and obey. I'm not going to say that. We're going into this as partners and this and that. What do you say to that? How do you? Yeah, what would you say to someone who is getting married and they're having, they read your book and they're having this discussion with you? What would you say to that?
Well, the backdrop is that my heart children have gotten married.
Yeah.
I performed Kate's wedding. So, I mean, it was definitely a hippie wedding, but, it was a wedding. And but when I did the vows with them, I talked about the history, and I talked about privilege, and I wanted to make sure that, you know, you can do this if this is what you want, but everybody here is going to know that you've just embarked on a relationship that's a relationship of privilege. So it was, you know, it was tricky. I tried to do it without being too strident, but you know, I just couldn't stand. You know, because you know, I've been so hurt by all of this my whole life that in so many different ways, and I never understood why people didn't get it. You know, that this is a practice that's very exclusionary.
Okay.
And it's a practice that's very tied up in commodities. You know, how much people spend on weddings is partly about the display of wealth, to say, you see what I'm marrying into, see what I'm going to be able to make. And the other part about, you know, not only how much it costs for the wedding, but how much the guests have to pay for the gifts. And it's a huge market. It's not, the wedding industry is not just what you pay to get married. It's the honeymoon, it's the destination, but it's the gifts, it's all the trappings. It makes it massive. And it's all in the interest of this thing called love. Okay, so this is the big piece for me. This is the big piece. This is about social priorities. Okay. We would rather spend $32,000 on a party than we would to go build wheelchair ramps for our disabled friends and family. You know, when you start thinking about the people who don't have food, you start thinking about people who need housing, you start thinking about all the ways that this system has been tiered, and that we give priority to that thing. And when I was in graduate school and I was later on, I had lots of friends from this community, you know, all hippies, all of them, every one of them, all activists, all like, you know, we're going to fight for peace. We're fighting against Vietnam. We're fighting, you know, they were all of them. And they all had weddings. And they all said to me, especially one, my wedding won't be like that. Like, it won't be like that.
Right.
I said, promise? Yeah, promise. It won't be like that. I said, okay. I went, it was. It's like, we're still friends, but you know, it's sort of like, yeah, it didn't, nah, you did it. But of course, at that point in time, you know, as same-sex relationships weren't honored. So, you know, it's a different moment, and we're much better about that. But when I look at the studies that have been done on same-sex weddings, they mirror. It's a mirror. It's not changing anything. It's a mirror.
And that's what I wanted to ask you about as well. So you're reading my mind there. You jumped ahead. As it's opened up to everyone to be able to get married, whether it's interracial marriages or the gay community, being able to get married. What's the message? What I mean, there's no other platform to look at, and so Chrys, we just want to be together, and we want to have that certificate that says we're married.
What's the attachment to the government, you know?
Right.
There's a great book I read years ago, one of my favorite books, Shaman's Daughter, and it's about the Ojibwe and what they do when a couple decides they want to be together. One carries the other across the threshold. That's it. That they're married. And I was like, wow, look at that. That's so cool. You know, and then they might have a fire outside and everybody sits around and, you know, has some food and stuff, but they're married. Okay, great. And then when they decide that it isn't working, they do the reverse. Okay, we're done. And that's the end of it. It's like, why is this this goes back to conversation you and I had earlier today
Well, I would imagine that
about the boxes.
the boxes and creating boxes of safety and what and like that. But I would imagine divorce is a big money deal as well.
Well, it's property.
But if there wasn't marriage, can you imagine the divorce lawyers and the court system? I mean, imagine. But what is it that the government offers the privileged married people? What do they offer those people, and not the ones who don't have the government signed wedding certificate?
Yeah, that was this preceded this era when I did this work. When I was working at the airlines, I told you about it. There's 400 people, right? We get benefits. We'd get pass privileges. I would get a pass privilege for me and my parents. Okay. The person sitting next to me is married. She gets a pass privilege for her husband, her kids, her parents. And so I started realizing that these are like units of benefit, right? Why am I getting less units than she's getting? And then you start looking at things like insurance, healthcare. I've got this great healthcare package where I work. I can't share it with anybody. It frustrates the hell out of me because there are other people in my life who could use that support. But, if I'm married, kids get it, husband gets it, partner gets it, right? Goes on and on and on. But if you think about them as units, it's a system that's built on the heterosexual institution that we call marriage.
Right.
And it's the same with taxes. It's the same with just about everything.
So
Social Security. Oh, that's the one.
Social Security, pensions.
That's the one. I didn't know this. I just found this out. So you turn a certain age, you get Social Security benefits you've been paying into forever, right? You're divorced, okay? You get half of your ex-partner's Social Security in addition to what you're getting.
Right.
And I'm sitting here going, wait a minute, how come they get more than I do? So yeah, and my sister right now is going crazy because her husband's ex-wife is getting half of his Social Security. So, it's sort of like, what is this? And someone I know whose husband is deceased went and got his Social Security, even though they were divorced.
Wow.
Yeah. So you see how it works in this kind of fabric.
What's in it for the government? Why do they want to own everybody and still have so much control?
Well, that's a good question. That's really a good question.
Well, you know me.
Yep.
You know me.
Yep. So how does the government benefit? Well, probably the same way any structure benefits. It's all about who holds the power and how to keep them in check, how to keep them from having any more power. I think that's what we're watching right now, with what some of these conservatives or right wingers are trying to do. They're trying to roll back so much. And I read another thing today that they were actually eyeing Brown versus Board of Education, which is really about the segregation of schools, right? And if they do that, this country will rip to shreds. I mean, we've got people in the streets now. It's like a master plan.
And another, and not to veer away from that, because that's an important discussion there, but another thing I wanted to look at here with not having the certificate of marriage, that you don't have rights to your partner in the hospital.
Right.
And unless you have signed in to the government as a couple, you know what I mean? It just, the system doesn't work. It doesn't work anymore.
Well,
that
and
it ever did, but
the other story that just recently happened was two women killed in a car accident, and one woman was married to another woman, and the police never found her to tell her that her partner had just died. So, it's beyond those sort of.
And they were married,
Yeah.
She had every right.
Yes. Yeah. No, when we saw that unfold, we were all brokenhearted about it. It wasn't okay. But it's partly the mindset too. That's really what we're talking about. That you can change the rules, you can change the laws, but you have to also change the ways of thinking. There's a huge taken for granted in there about what counts as legitimate relationships. So the police go to the extended family, but they don't go to the partner.
Horrifying.
Yeah, beyond horrifying. So just cruel.
In regards to of course, right in your sneeze, sorry. I mean, is this ever going to change where we can just kind of, this is my partner, how is that going to, without signing in, how is this ever going to change? Do we see a change here?
I think it will someday. I don't think it's going to be in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
I think what, this goes back to conversations that you and I have all the time about equality. What do we need these boxes for? What do we need these regulations for? I mean, some of it you do, some of it you do. So you do need assault rifles off the list. Those are moments, but when we talk about difference and being able to navigate our differences with each other, we don't have to agree. We don't have to regulate ourselves in a way that shuts down any differences.
There you go.
And I've said this forever. Love is not about bodies. Love is not about bodies. People get caught in that trap, and it's part of that same trap, the commodification of heterosexuality. Sexuality, period, becomes a business in and of itself. And so understanding that love is not about bodies, this is the shell.
Right.
This is we'll have that conversation another time, but when you got the death sentence, you realize this is the shell. I'm in here, but I'm going to be leaving this thing someday.
Yeah.
It's not permanent. And so when you realize that, you also realize that shell gives us an opportunity to express, but that's all it is. So love is really not about bodies, and it's not about gender or race, or those are all social categories we've created to keep a hierarchy, to keep tiers, to keep things in order. Marriage and heterosexuality are part of that. But I think it goes back to what we talked about last time we talked on this thing. What were we talking? What were we talking? I love it when that happens. I lost it completely. Okay, pause.
I love it.
Just so the viewers know, we have a pause for brain farts.
So far, it's 1 and 1. It's 1 to 1.
Sure. No, I was saying that it gets so entrenched. When we talk about, we talked yesterday about getting so sick of politics, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you start to scratch the surface of this issue, the marriage, weddings, heterosexuality issue, people get very passionate. So when I was on a book tour, they sent me to very I don't remember the name of it because this was 1999. He sent me to a very popular radio show. And the call-ins, they were all people calling in when they were commuting. So the call-ins were massive, and they ended up having to extend the show. And but what I was getting were mostly men saying, I don't care what you say, my daughter's going to get married whether she likes it or not, and I'm going to spend a lot of money because that's what we do. We've earned a lot. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I heard that. You know, in LA was really strong, and then on Long Island, same sort of thing.
Wow.
It's all men. It was all men. You know, that she's going to be upstanding and blah, 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 and they're going to have kids and we're going to own those, it's that kind of thing. I need to have my heir. I need to know who I'm going to pass my wealth on to. And that's my grandchildren. So she better be married and he better be good. It's like, listen to the rules in the box.
Right. This is the rules. This is the
anything
box.
to do with love. Nothing to do with love.
It has everything to do with feeling secure. And before you even went in there, I'm just like, what is that feeling of, because, I was married for a very long time. And I was trying to remember back to, what started that path for me. And I took it back to the beginning and what would that be for people? And it's about being secure, security, and at some level.
Yeah.
And the price people pay for that security.
Yeah.
I worked in the ER. I saw the price a lot of what it was to try to stay and keep that security.
Right.
At the price of their own face or broken arm or whatever. And but not wanting to give up this so-called security. The embedded narrative is so strong and so you're in that cloud of just false narrative of what this means. But how do we, and it's going to take time, like you said, it's not going to be in our lifetime, but slowly changing that narrative of what that even looks like.
Yeah.
You're terrifying people. You're terrifying people, Chrys, with this knowledge. It's terrifying.
No.
But you're bringing it to the
No.
So you're willing to talk about it. You're the one willing to talk about it. And it can be terrifying to people if you're like going, okay, so your box is this and that. Nope, it is not. My box is not that. I am not that. I have a beautiful family and I live in this house and I have food on the table and I have clothes on and I have a new car every 2 years. And you know what I mean? I like my security and I'm not going to leave this. So I don't care what you say. You know what I mean? It's going to be tough to bring in a new narrative to these people.
Well, yeah. One of the interesting things I always found, and I stopped teaching that book. Other people teach that book, but I stopped. And I think I told you this last time. I stopped partly because I couldn't penetrate. The 18 to 22-year-olds, all they kept saying was, I want my party.
I want my party.
I want my party.
That's what people, that's
what I want. I want my party. I want my center of attention and I want my party. One kid was so adamant about it in class. I said, well, is there a groom? She said, what do you mean? I said, we could talk about your party. Is there going to be anybody else there?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, he'll be there. I want my dress. I want my moment, let it be, it's like, it's all of that. It's like going to Disney World and seeing all the little girls dressed in the same dress. It's the same thing.
Exactly.
It's a little scary, actually.
But that's what has been. You can look back over you did a lot of research in writing this book. You go back years, hundreds of years, and see how this story was played out and how.
The other part of this is the white gown.
The white gown.
It wasn't, women in the US did not get married in white gowns.
No.
They were gray. And
or light blue.
Well, until speaking from experience, no. What it wasn't until Queen Victoria wanted to wear a white wedding gown that it became part of the prescription for American society. And so now the white wedding gown is standard in Western cultures. But here's the real kicker. And of course, I was one of the curators for a Wedded Bliss exhibit in Massachusetts. And they brought in people from all over the world, or images from all over the world. The wedding clothes in other cultures are absolutely exquisite. They're absolutely drop dead gorgeous. But what has shifted is that they'll get married in the traditional, and then they'll have a second wedding to wear the white gown. In Japan, they do it. They do 2 weddings. They do, and they'll invite somebody to officiate who looks like some American guy. And in various parts of Africa, same thing. They'll do 2 weddings. India, 2 weddings, and it's always Western clothes and indigenous. So I always found that, but I never understood why in American culture we haven't sort of shifted away from the white gown towards something that's much prettier.
Well, you know, we do have pockets of people who, you know, they'll dress up in Halloween costumes and get married. You know what I mean? We do have the pockets. And a whole nother subject, but I know we're coming to the end of here, is military and getting married, because guess what? You get so much more, you get paid for that, you know.
Right.
So you're having all these weddings happen just so you can get paid more.
Yeah.
And housing,
Yep.
it all changes for you if you're married.
Yeah.
What? Okay. So anyways, wrapping this around, and seeing some of the, you know, towards the end of the book. Is that yours?
Pause.
Okay, so that wasn't a brain fart. That was a dog bark. So we're still 1-to-1. We're still.
If there's a cat, you'll know it. Yeah. She screams.
So kind of as we look at this, and there's so many more stories here that we can look at. It's way more than an hour, but and I can already hear some of the comments of but you know we're just getting married because we need the benefits that certificate offers.
Yeah, but that's real, you know.
Yeah,
I was on an interview call years ago with I forget who was some journalist, and she had on the phone me with 2 African American women in New York City, and they were a couple, and they made a very persuasive argument, because I was still sort of holding my line about no marriage, you know.
right.
We don't need this. And they said, we have to fight for gay marriage because right now we're starving to death without the benefits.
There you go.
And I shut up. I stopped making the argument. I mean, they were very persuasive. So that when I was on that panel and they wanted me to talk, I didn't want to argue against it.
Right.
You know, but at the same time, I didn't want it to erase everything. So, you know.
Yeah. And that's a good point. What they did not say was, we're getting married because we want to commit to each other. Right. You don't need to get married to commit. So their argument was good. We just need those.
No, the classic argument is always about the kids. Everybody always says the same thing. They have to get married. We've got kids.
Oh.
They have to have the name and they have to be able to get the benefits. We have to protect our children. Of course, you know, now most states have child support laws. So whether you're married or not, you know, if that's your kid, you still have to pay. But
right, you know, yeah. And you can give the kid the name without being married, right?
Right.
So and you know, I can say that, you know, my daughter is choosing she absolutely is right on board with all of this. And they, you know, there's any kids would have both their names. So that's how that's going to work. Anyway, so I think moving forward, it's about changing that initial narrative that we're bombarded with from, you know, we're already planned our wedding by the age of 3. And so, you know, because that's what we're seeing, you know, in our cartoons, in our books, it's always a, you know, that pretty, you know, good for a lot of us. And so it's changing that narrative. It's writing new books. It's writing new stories. It's like, you know, putting those new shows out. I think in your book, I quote something about Queer Eye, and what's the Queer Eye show? So just bringing things to normalcy instead of, so it's basically bombarding the old narrative with the new, with what's happening now, and bringing things to the light. But it takes writing new books. It takes producing new shows. You know what I mean? That's what it's going to take.
Intellectually curious.
It takes the intellectually curious. Look at us wrapping it all the way back to the
well, I do want to add one piece in here, which is we've talked a lot about, especially the last time we did this, about what work we have to do to create a society that's not racist. And, you know, this is a book about that uses weddings as a site to show you how this stuff is embedded in everything we do. That's really it. It's really not about weddings as much as it's about how those hierarchies, those imbalances, those prejudices, those boxes are embedded in the social fabric.
Oh,
okay. So you can pick a topic and you'll find, you know, you'll do the same kind of work and you'll find a lot of the same stuff. So going back to what we talked about last time, the real lesson here is to figure out, you know, sort of what we talked about last time about what was her name, Melissa Murray, and how she did all that work on reproductive rights in the history. You know, these are the pieces that are woven into the very fabric of our social order that we don't see. And when you talk about narrative, that's part of the narrative. That's what legitimizes that narrative.
Yeah.
So if we're going to talk about activism, and we're going to talk about human rights and reproductive rights and gay rights and equality, and we're going to try and become less racist and hopefully anti-racist, it takes looking at all of that. It takes lifting up the rock, seeing what's underneath, and saying, I need to clean that out.
Yes.
That's the stuff.
We are in the age of clean out, bringing everything to the surface, no matter what.
Yeah,
it makes us feel,
no matter how tired we get of hearing about it. Yes.
Oh, and how tired we.
It's like, oh, do we really have to talk about politics again?
But it's the deal, and it's what we're here, and we're here to create change, and we're here to ask questions and keep this.
But that's the activism, you know. That's the activism. We talked about that before, but that's the activism. The activism. What did we talk about last time about that? About history, about the 19th century stuff, understanding what came before us. This is no different. You know, so when people talk about things like weddings, my phone just went off. When people talk about weddings, they're really talking about a symptom, not the problem.
See, she's leaving us with a cliffhanger.
Oh God, I love you.
And we both love you all. Thank you for hanging out with us with this conversation. I can tell you, we both can't wait to read your comments. And if it spurred some questions and any of that, looking forward to that conversation in the comments. So blessings to you until next time. And
Ruth sent us.
and Ruth
Sent us.
Ruth sent me, but Ruth sent us. So here we are. Love you guys. See you next time.